What is up, guys? My name is Doug Polk, and we're back for another special edition of Poker Hands. And today we're going to be looking at a hand played between, you got it right, Mike McDermott and Teddy KGB once again. So let's jump right into the action.
Raise. 1,000 straight.
Don't raise to 20 big blinds heads up as your open size.
Very aggressive. A new die. And you won't be pushed around.
If you're going to raise to 1K, probably put out 1K instead of 2K.
But I re-raise.
Don't string bet.
5,000.
If you're going to raise to 5K, don't put 6K chips in the pot.
I'll re-raise, I'm all in.
Take it down.
Don't put 9K into the pot pre-flop and then fold to your opponent's 9K jam. Thanks for joining us this week on Poker Hands. Stay tuned next week on our episode on applying bronzer. Oh, wait, we have way too much time left. Okay, I guess we'll do another hand.
You must be kicking yourself for not walking out when you could. Bad judgment. But don't you worry, son. It will all be over soon.
Check.
Unfortunately, our hand begins on the flop, so we don't really know what happened pre-flop. What we do know is Mike is out of position and about 10 blinds seem to have been put in pre-flop. What's confusing to me is that it seems like Mike has his small blind out and Teddy has his big blind out, but then the hand doesn't really make sense. So I guess we're going to kind of assume that Teddy raised and Mike called, although maybe Teddy limped and Mike raised and Teddy called. I mean, those are both, I guess, somewhat reasonable things that could have occurred. But we're going to just kind of talk as if Teddy had raised and Mike had called. So the flop is ace-5-3 and Mike has ace-5. And this is one of the classic scenes from the movie. Mike gets a tell that the Oreo means strength and decides to check on the flop. But as we all should know, if you do call and open in the big blind and heads up no limit, you should be checking all of your hands over to your opponent anyway. So his tell might have been useful in deciding whether to fold or not, but you should definitely be checking here over to Teddy.
No tricks here. I chip you.
So Mike checks, and now Teddy decides to bet 5-ish thousand. It's kind of hard to hear exactly what he said through the Oreo mumblings, but it appears to put Mike about all in, who has $4,500, maybe $5,000 behind into a pot of around 1,000. So let's talk about Teddy's bet size here. I don't think that it makes a lot of sense, particularly because Mike is on a shorter stack size. He's mainly going to be re-raising with his ace-x hands pre-flop. So when there's an ace on the board, Teddy's range is going to have a lot more strong hands than Mike's will. Also, in this spot, Mike kind of either has an ace, a 5, a 3, or nothing. Maybe a gut shot with a 2 or 4, but But because his range has so many weak hands and then a few kind of strong hands, it's a good situation for Teddy to use a small bet size to take advantage of that. I'd like to see Teddy bet between 400 and 600 here, probably leaning a little bit more towards 400 or 500, but those are all totally reasonable bet sizes to choose from. He instead decides to put his opponent in, and the problem with this is now if your opponent doesn't have a very good hand, then they're just going to be folding instead of, being able to get value with your good hands. And if you're bluffing, first off, your opponent's more likely to have a good hand, but then second off, you're not really offering yourself a very attractive price on this bet size. So overall, not a big fan of this play. Maybe he wants to work in some bluffs with a hand like 6-4 or 6-2 or 7-6. And if he was putting maybe some hands like 4-2 or a set, those kinds of hands, and then mixing them in with some straight draws, I wouldn't mind this play in general. I wouldn't mind it as much, but it's kind of hard to say exactly what Teddy's strategy is going to be here in the small blind, and he should likely just be using a smaller size. Now it's back over to Mike.
I'm laying this down, Teddy. Top 2 pair. It's a monster hand. I'm gonna lay that down. Because you got 2-4, and I'm not gonna draw against a made hand.
So here Mike makes his biggest read of the movie, and really I think this is one of, if not the most quintessential Rounders hands. I guess maybe the first hand or the ending hand could be considered to be more so, but this is definitely up there. And, I want to say this. Even if he's picked up a read that Teddy is strong here, and maybe the Oreo thing does mean he's strong, I would argue that you still have to put in your chips here heads up, because let's just think about the situation. So your opponent's betting about $5,000 into $1,000. So that means you're going to need to continue with about 15-ish% of your range in order to not let him bluff you, right? So you have to have about 15% of your hands call, and of that, ace-5 is clearly good enough. I mean, really, realistically, facing an open, the big blind, you're only going to have maybe 4-2 suited or 5-5 or 3-3 that's even better. So if Mike was going to continue to make folds like this, then it allows Teddy to bluff him with a lot of those straight draw type hands that we were talking about earlier. But besides the fact that, we are so high up in all the hands we can have, besides that, also think about what Teddy might be value betting here. We're playing heads up, no limit. And so there's a few things to take into consideration. First off, 4-2 off on the button is generally not a playable hand, so Teddy's likely going to be folding that pre-flop, particularly as Mike gets shorter because Mike can re-raise more. So 4-2 off isn't really a hand he's going to have that frequently, or rather shouldn't have that frequently. So we can kind of discount that somewhat. And then after that, you lose to specifically 3-3, 5-5, and ace-ace. And 3-3 and 5-5 are both definitely hands that he could have that beat you, but you have a 5, so he's a lot less likely to have a hand like 5-5. And even though ace-ace beats you, this would be a remarkably stupid play with ace-ace, because what are you planning on getting paid by? What does your opponent have? He has nothing, right? So realistically, you kind of have to be scared of 4-2 suited or 3-3. Everything else not really making that much sense. And I think this ties in nicely to another conversation that I want to have, or really, on this theme of dealing with really large bets. And sometimes in poker, your opponent picks a size that's really annoying for your hand. Trips on a flush board, a straight on a flush board, a straight on a paired board. These types of situations where if they had bet 2/3 pot, you'd be down to call, maybe even raise, and then they just bomb it, and you're put in this really annoying predicament. And obviously, this is a movie, so a lot of people in the chat, they get angry and they're like, "Oh man, how can you analyze it? It's a movie." Well, we're trying to take concepts from this movie and then discuss them in a way that we can learn from. And the question comes up a lot, like, what do I do when this player overbets massively? And the first thing that you want to do is just keep your cool. Because I think a lot of people, they get really tied up in the moment and they start to feel all these things, like, am I getting bluffed? Is he never bluffing? All this stuff. You kind of want to remove yourself from that, and you want to take a step back, and the first and most important question you should ask yourself is, what are all of the hands I can have here, right? How strong is this hand given all of my hands? And for example, in this hand, the answer is quite strong. But in some of those situations I talked about before, where you have a straight and a flush board, or a flush on a paired board, or whatever, in general, you probably can't fold a lot of those hands. But let's just say, for example, you're facing a 6x pot overbet here. It could become quite reasonable for those same hands you might even want to raise to now become folds, because you can have these stronger hands. On those paired boards, you can have boats, you can have the nut flush, you can have a flush that blocks some kind of boat, you could have all these kinds of hands that are better, and you're not forced to just continue the hand. I think a lot of people, there's this old poker mantra that, you don't want to call the turn and fold the river, or you don't want to call the flop to fold the turn, or whatever these stupid expressions are. Those things are just not true, because you don't know what the situation is going to be yet, and you should make your decision based on all your hands, all of your opponent's hands, and what goes down. Don't go into the river thinking like, no matter what, I'm going to show down. Well, what if he bets 10x pot or 5x pot? Are you going to commit to this? Oh, I said I was going to show down. No, you should think about all of your hands, and not even think about your individual holding you have as what you have. I know that's going to just blow some minds. Some people are going to be like, who the hell is this idiot? But think about all of those hands when you want to adjust to these strategies. So, if Mike did get away from the 4-2 here, which it looks like he did given Teddy's reaction, although that would be some great faking it there from Teddy if he didn't actually have the 4-2. But anyway, don't be afraid to put in your stack with strong hands, and consider all of the hands your opponent can have before making big laydowns.
Lies down a monster. Should have paid me off on that. The fuck did you lay that down?
Not hungry?
Mr. Son of a Bitch, let's play some cards.
All right, so there were a lot of people saying that I had a bronzer on for a previous episode, and I just want to take this wet towel, well, he's clearly wet, to prove to you that I do not have bronzer. As you can see, I dab it off, and it's complete. Wait, what the fuck? Now, I know that in general, Negreanu tends to be a little more on the conservative side compared to most players. And so maybe there's some argument that you should be looking to find a fold with this hand at some point on the turn of the river.